time today to really get ready for next week.
Wonderful.
Including my offer that you can start the essay Tuesday.
Well,
Start the essay, Blue Book essay, Tuesday.
why is there an orange peel on the floor?
The free and natural air freshener.
Okay.
Why go and buy those stupid plug-in things? Just buy an orange, squeeze the skin so that the orange oil squirts out.
I don't like the smell of oranges.
Take it back.
No,
Take it back.
Her opinion.
it's my, yeah.
It's your own opinion.
So phone's away.
It's still on.
In 1896, a person named Plessy, who was 1/8 black, which tells you that, so if he's 1/8 black, that means one of his parents was 1/4 black, which means one of his grandparents was 1/8, one of his,
No, half.
yeah. So one of his 8 great-grandparents was black, the other 7 were white. He ends up being 1/8 black. So this cartoon is highly inaccurate in terms of visual representation. In fact, Plessy kept telling people he was black intentionally so that he would be confronting what he felt was an unjust situation. He bought a railroad ticket. He bought a first-class ticket to a railroad car in Louisiana. So he attempts to get on the railroad car, and he's told by the conductor, no, you can't sit here. Does that sound familiar? Black person, okay, very good. This is the original Rosa. He Rosa before Rosa. I'm sorry? He Plessy. That's what we should be saying, that Rosa Plessy. The word Plessy makes me feel uncomfortable for some reason, though. So anyway, he argued, wait a minute, first-class ticket. And the conductor said, well, you're black, you're supposed to sit in the black railroad car. But I have a first-class ticket. Doesn't matter. You sit in the black car. And so he sues. And Plessy is the individual, this person. Ferguson is the judge in Louisiana who found Plessy was in the wrong. So he sued the judge. He certainly did sue the railroad company initially, but what made it to the Supreme Court was not that the railroad was wrong, but that the law was wrong. The Jim Crow law in Louisiana saying you could have separate railroad cars. So he's suing the government, the state of Louisiana judge. Okay, makes Supreme Court. There's Ferguson right there, that guy. The state law says the railroad must set up separate but equal facilities for whites and colored races. They've done that, and Mr. Plessy here is arguing that's not fair. The Supreme Court. So his behavior is civil disobedience, right? He knew the law was there. He knew it. He wasn't surprised. He did it anyway. You as an American have that right. If you feel that something's not right, break the law on purpose. It's what Rosa did. It's what Martin did. It's what people do all the time. Individuals. What we've tried to figure out in this class is, well, if individuals can do it, why can't states? Why can't states break what they see as unjust laws? And we've had raging debates about the idea of states' rights. If you have the right as an individual to break an unjust law, why can't states break what they consider to be unjust laws? Anyway, we're not going to have that discussion yet. The Supreme Court ruled in 1896 that Louisiana was in the right as long as the separate facilities are
Equal.
As long as they're equal, they are in the right. Now this is 1896. When did Reconstruction end? Ish. 1870 something. That's right. 1877 is actually acknowledged to be the actual year when the last Union soldiers left the South. about 20 years later, the federal government looks at Jim Crow laws and says, looks good. Go ahead, South, segregate. As long as you can argue that your separate facilities are in the ballpark of equal, we will not stop you.
But what does that mean?
Yeah, that's one question. What does equal mean? And the other question is, let's say you're a black man and you're in Georgia or something and you feel that the hotel room that you rented out is not equal to the white hotel room. To whom do you go to register your complaint? Who's there? There is no federal government present in the South anymore. They're gone. And I suppose you could get on a bus and drive up to Washington, D.C., but the economic reality is just not there.
How would the black person know the difference between the white person and the black person?
I
They
don't know.
would not have access to those.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. I suppose, yeah. What I'm telling you is that the federal government in 1896 gave, in essence, its blessing. Go ahead, South, segregate. Maybe putting the cherry on top of that sundae known as the failure of Reconstruction. If you're so inclined to make that argument. Question? Okay. So let's see, this is 1896. 1896. Subtract 1954. 8. Son of a 8, 15, 14. 14 minus 6 is 8. 14 minus 9 is 5. 58 years later. 58 years later, a different Supreme Court would change its mind and argue separate facilities based on race are inherently unequal. You cannot have a separate facility based on race that is equal, even if it is equal. If you had another universe with a black Mr. Potter and whatever the opposite of red is, and all of you are black, and except those of you who are black, you're white, and if it was exactly the same, every word, it would still be unequal. And what would make it unequal?
They were separate.
That they were separate. The separateness makes it unequal. The separateness makes it unequal, is what the Supreme Court would rule 58 years later in 1954. By the way, does anyone know what I'm talking about? What happened in 1954? Those of you who will be arguing that Reconstruction succeeded, I urge you to have a big picture argument. That's where you've got to go. To say it wouldn't have happened in 1954 had it not been for Reconstruction. That Reconstruction was the first step in the race, right? You're at a marathon. You take your first step in the race and you fall down. You say, son of a, I quit. Or do you get back up and keep running, right? And you finish the race and you were however many seconds later because you fell. Do you say, well, that was a failure because I fell on step one? Well, no, right? You still succeeded because of that first step. That's what you have to do. You have to have a big picture. And in 1954 was the beginning of the end of segregation. No one knows what I'm talking about? Something happened in 1954. You know what happened. You looked at it. That's good.
The school board?
Very good, right? In Topeka, Kansas, a black family that lived close, very good, a black family named Brown, weird, lived close to the white school, sued the school district to allow his daughter to just walk to the white school. They said no. He sued them. It made it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court overruled the idea of separate but equal. The Supreme Court changed its mind. In 1954, the Supreme Court ended this policy. Separate but equal. No more.
Is that the scene in Forrest Gump where the
scene in Forrest Gump is what happened after the ruling. So in 1954, the Supreme Court ruled no more segregated schools. And southern states said, screw you. We're going to Rosa your Supreme Court ruling. States are going to nullify, does this sound familiar? We are going to nullify the findings of the Supreme Court. What are you going to do about it? And the president at the time, Eisenhower, said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do about it. There's this law in the book since Jackson was president. It gives me the authority to use the army to enforce the law. Anyone remember that little bundle of joy? Remember that law? It was called the Force Act. Eisenhower used the Force Act and sent soldiers to escort black students to schools. And that's the scene in Forrest Gump. The Little Rock Nine, exactly right. Because Arkansas said, we're not doing it. We're not going to desegregate. Basically, the federal government said, yes, you are. And the governor of Arkansas stood in the way of the school. As the students are trying to walk in, he stood in the way. Now, he didn't stay there. It was a symbolic gesture. He basically said, I'm symbolically standing in the way. And then he got out of the way and then let them in. But he was basically arguing that the state of Arkansas did not have to go along with the ruling of the Supreme Court. In another example of federalism, right? Do states have to go along with the wishes of the federal government? Do individuals have to go along with a law that they think is unjust? Can states rose up? Is another way to say it. Okay. Any questions? Great. I don't want to take up much of your time, honestly. I want to give you a nice solid chunk of time here, but I want to just visit some interesting things about the Civil War. We're not going to look at all 54 of these slides.
Oh my gosh.
So just relax.
How long did it take you to make all this?
Don't worry about it. Just some interesting things to note about the Civil War. So we're going back to the Civil War. The blue represents the North. The gray represents the South. Total population, by far the North had an advantage. Financial advantage, North. Factories, 86% of the factories were in the North. Food. The cotton was a bit of an advantage for the South, right? 99.9% to 0.1. Don't dismiss the advantage of horses. That is not insignificant. Donkeys and mules, advantage South. So there you go. Railroad tax, huge advantage North. Okay. Just keeping going here. This is a visual of all the railroads. And you might wonder, what difference does it make? Why do railroads matter when you're fighting a war? Railroads give you the ability to move men and supplies quickly, right? So the North could move soldiers. Also, if you're the Northern Army and you capture a few of these railroads, you've just basically decapitated the South's ability to move men and supplies. And that's exactly what the North tried to do, right? Destroy railroads. I told you about a Sherman bow tie, right? I told you about that?
No.
Why haven't I done that? Sherman, when Grant was named the commander of the Army of the Potomac, a guy by the name of Sherman became the new commander of the Army of the West, the army that Grant used to command. And Sherman was the one who marched through Georgia, destroying everything. Remember that? Right? Total warfare. And what he did was he destroyed the railroads. So he would dig a ditch underneath the railroad and put coal in it, in the ditch, ignite it so that the railroad itself would get really hot, saw it, and then take it and tie it around the nearest tree, which would suck if you were the next train. That would be bad. But why does Zorro leave his mark? Why do the X-Men leave their mark?
So they know who did it?
So that you walk along later and say, Zorro! When Southerners walked by that railroad, they called it a Sherman bow tie. Son of Sherman!
Sherman.
Right? Psychological warfare. Get into the head of your enemy. Sherman could be anywhere. He could be anywhere.
Isn't that like the eyes and like the long nose that was John can't remember what war it was.
Oh,
Yeah,
she's
they
talking
would like
about,
draw like the eyes
I have
and
a
like
picture
the
of it
big
from
nose.
BC.
Oh, I don't know what you're talking
Oh,
about.
what's that?
It sounds like that's exactly the same. Okay, great. Another visual advantage North, number of workers, number of factories, value, railroads.
Kilroy.
Yeah, that one,
Kilroy.
that guy.
That thing.
Kilroy.
He used to put these things up. There's one at the,
The ability of the North to replenish their number of soldiers. The blue represents the number joining each year. And of course, the North has the advantage. They have immigration. Nobody immigrated to the South. Nobody from Europe said, I really want to go to the South of the US. They went to New York. And then from there, joined the Union Army. Who cares? This is an example. Percent of immigrants of a state's population, right? The entire South, with the exception of Louisiana, is less than 10% population based on immigrants. You'll notice that Wisconsin and Minnesota, very high immigrant population, the highest in the entire country. And I'll tell you why. It's because this is around the same time as the Irish potato famine.
People want cheese.
And one thing to dispel, the potato famine happened in all of Europe. It's just that the rest of the Europeans figured out to grow other things. Never occurred to the Irish. Like, oh, other food never occurred. So they emigrated in massive amounts. That was Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy. There's the vice president. That's the Southern White House, the Southern version of the White House. The South, for some reason, moved their capital from Jackson, Mississippi to Richmond, Virginia. And historians honestly are baffled. Why? Why would you move it from here to there? 90 miles from Washington, D.C.
power move.
Why? Right?
Get in their heads. Mental warfare.
This is the seal of the Confederate States of America. The Confederate States honestly saw themselves as in the right, that they were continuing what the Revolution started. The Revolution is when a group of people broke away from an oppressive foreign foe. That's how the South saw the Civil War. That they were breaking free from an oppressive foreign foe. Interesting to see it that way. I'm gonna let you just look at these two and see if you can see what is going on. You'll know when you see it. I'll give you a clue. Compare the two pictures.
Oh,
Okay.
See it? Got it?
Yeah.
They're the same picture. You see it yet?
Why they got it right away.
That's Jefferson Davis. That's Jefferson Davis upside down. Right? Being called a horse's ass was just as an insult back then as it is today. Right? Basically, we're calling Jefferson Davis an ass. Right?
Figure it doesn't see.
Go back. Look at
Look at the mustache.
Fine, get out a marker and start drawing it.
Yeah,
Outline it.
It's a horse. It's a donkey.
the one in,
Yeah, okay.
He's lying, he doesn't see it.
This was the Union strategy. Remember, there were 5 parts to the Union goal. One was to capture Richmond, and that was the Army of the Potomac. The other was a blockade, that was the Union Navy. The other was to capture the Mississippi River, which would be the Army of the West plus the Navy, they met at Vicksburg. The other was total warfare, and the final was capturing the southern border of Tennessee. So just sort of a visual of what the Union's plan was. And of course, the Confederate plan was to prevent all of this from happening. Another visual of the Anaconda Plan, thought up by a guy by the name of Winfield Scott. He was the Secretary of War under Lincoln. He's the one who sort of devised the plan, which you have to conclude did not work. This plan did not lead to the South losing. What led to the South losing was Grant. And Grant, looking at this plan, said, screw this. I'll tell you what we need to do. It'll end the war. It'll end the war. Anyone know? All this stuff capturing the Mississippi, blockading, it doesn't matter. As soon as we do this, war's over.
They said that they had to free their slaves.
Good guess. Finish the sentence. Get
To the other side.
The flag.
Get
What?
person.
Oh, yeah,
Perfect.
whatever the
Lee.
name is, yeah.
Get Lee. Capture Lee, war's over. Get Lee. And so the end of the Civil War was battle after battle, Grant against Lee, and Lee won every single battle. And Grant's like, great, awesome, let's do it again tomorrow. And every battle, Grant lost more soldiers than Lee. But Grant had an advantage, 2 advantages. Lee's army was fixed, could never grow. Grant had these lovely people called immigrants. Oh no, I lost 10,000 more men. 10,000 more men show up the next day. Oh no, right? Can you imagine being a soldier fighting for Grant? You know what your job is?
To die.
To go get shot multiple times. Go, right? In fact, historians argue this. The truth is questionable, but the claim was that Grant had more men than Lee had bullets. I have more men than you have bullets, so go get shot twice, and you've done your job. Which would suck if you were a soldier, right? Let's meet the generals, and by the way, they might all be packing. You don't know, so back off. This is the Secretary of War, Winfield Scott. McDowell was the original Union commander of the Army of the Potomac, fired after the first battle. This is McClellan. He might be packing. You don't know. Back off. He was fired about a month later by Lincoln. Lincoln was a war president, man. He was a bad mouth. He fired people left and right. You're not winning, you're fired. Let's move on. Right? That is Burnside. Back off, ladies. Taken already. And if you're wondering, the biggest legacy of Burnside is his sideburns. I mean it. Sideburns are named after this guy. When you have sideburns, you have this Union general to thank. Because look at those things. You just want to grab it. And just, look at that forehead. Nothing doesn't end. So this guy's legacy is sideburns. Guess what this guy's legacy is?
Hookers.
Oh.
You're right. Prostitutes are named after this guy. He called them hookers girls. Right? The men are lonely, so let's hire a bunch of prostitutes. They were called hookers girls. They dropped the girls. They're called hookers. So look what we get from the Civil War. Sideburns and prostitutes. Mr. Meade here was the Union general at the Battle of Gettysburg, the largest, I guarantee this is a test question, the largest battle ever to take place in North America is the Battle of Gettysburg. The largest battle to ever take place in North America, Battle of Gettysburg. We'll chat about it a bit. He was fired after the Battle of Gettysburg, even though he won the battle. That's how impatient Lincoln
In South
is.
America?
Not quite. He beat, so Gettysburg, which happened in Pennsylvania, which is weird, because Pennsylvania is a Union state, which means the South invaded, which is odd, right? Only 2 battles took place in Northern Territory, Gettysburg, and then another battle called Antietam. So the South invaded the North. Meade succeeded in repelling the invasion and was so happy at defeating the man, the myth, the legend, Robert E. Lee, that he gave his men a couple days off to celebrate. And Lincoln, you had him. You had Lee in Pennsylvania. You let him go. Look at that. McClellan again. He gave him another chance. And he was fired again. He might be packing. You don't know. Back off. And then finally, Mr. Grant. Again, Grant's major contribution was the abandonment of the Anaconda Plan that all these people followed. Screw that plan. We are going to go where Lee is. If Lee goes here, I'll be there. If he goes here, I'll be there. And he told Lincoln this. Don't fire me after I lose a battle. I will lose battle after battle and win. Imagine that strategy, those of you in athletics. Okay, the plan is to lose every quarter and win the game, go to state. Right? If you're the coach, you're not gonna last. But it worked. It worked. Lose the battle, win the war. You might think that these are like dummies. That's actually Lincoln, and that is McClellan meeting. It's just a new form of photography was developed during the American Civil War, and this is sort of Lincoln looks weird, doesn't he? He looks like he's not real.
Fake.
In this, yeah, he looks fake. Let's meet some Confederate generals. That's Stonewall Jackson, who gained his nickname Stonewall at the Battle of Bull Run. As Confederate soldiers were retreating, he ordered his men to stay and fight, and the Battle of Bull Run, and earned the nickname Stonewall. He was the one guy Lee listened to, and which made his friendly fire death at the Battle of Chancellorsville all the more tragic for Lee. No one had the guts to tell Lee when he had a dumb idea, except this guy. He was the one guy that said, you know, Bob, I don't know about your idea. But he was killed at a battle called Battle of Chancellorsville, which is interesting because later on, after the Battle of Chancellorsville, Lee decided to invade Pennsylvania, Battle of Gettysburg. And at one point, any of you ever heard of Pickett's Charge? Does that sound familiar? Pickett's Charge? Gettysburg is an open field in Pennsylvania. Any of you been there?
Yeah.
It's possible some of you have been there. Okay, it's basically an open field. And the Union had the high ground. The Confederates had the low ground. Military tactics are that high ground is better. Lee had an idea to charge directly up the hill with no cover right at Union forces. And he proposed his idea. And none of his Confederate generals said, that's stupid. This is the one guy that may have said, I don't know, Bob. And Lee asked for volunteers. And Pickett volunteered his men, and they were wiped out. And it was a dominating victory. Mr. Pickett, there he is. Pickett of Pickett's Charge. A disaster for the South. Mr. Longstreet was in charge of Confederate cavalry forces. Nathan Bedford Forrest, who later on, he was an average general, but you know why he's famous. Forrest Gump is named after him. He's the founder of the KKK. There he is. In effect, he became the leader of the underground resistance, which was in a way much more effective than the Confederate resistance during the war itself. Jeb Stuart. Beards were big in the South, I guess. And then the man, legend, Robert E. Lee. And I think I've told you this story. How many of you have been to Arlington National Cemetery?
That's his house.
Beautiful. Yep, his house is, that's his house. Union soldiers were buried in his backyard just above him. And it became the nation's largest national cemetery. By the way, one of the 5 largest in the nation is right here. Into the airport. Instead of turning south, turn north. Have you been there? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Fort Snelling. It's one of the largest in the nation. It's beautiful. I have a cousin buried there. He died during the American invasion of Iraq in 1990, 1991. He's buried there. And it's super cool because you go there for a picnic sometime in the summer. Look at all the crosses, row by row. It's amazing. And then drive your car to the end, walk up the hill, and you are looking down at the airport. And you're watching these planes take off. It's super cool. Take your kids there someday. Okay, I don't want to take up too much of your time. We'll continue a little bit of this discussion Monday, but you have the rest of the hour, so you have a nice solid 20 minutes
She's awesome.
to accomplish stuff. Okay. Just a couple more things. A couple of you came up to me and said, all right, I'm going to use the 13th Amendment as my document evidence. What historical evidence do I use to prove the 13th Amendment?
Yeah, right.
Which is a good question, right? If you're using, is it document 10? Yeah. Is the 13th Amendment? Okay. So the 13th Amendment would be the document evidence. Your historical evidence would be where you prove that these people were set free. And I think it's easier than you think, right? Just find out how many slaves there were. We found, I think that was 3.9 million. They were no longer slaves. after the 13th Amendment. Some of them moved west, became farmers. Some of them moved north to work in northern factories. Some of them stayed there and became sharecroppers. That's the population that was re-enslaved through the various criminal movies. Right, so I'm gonna be at my desk and you'll come and just show me.
Or if you
I'm not gonna read them. I'm just gonna, yep, now acknowledge, there's your primary, there's your synthesis, we're good to go. Yeah, I'm checking it off.